Even at the height of the British Empire, there were only some 100,000 Englishmen, including women and children, in the subcontinent compared to nearly 300 million Indians. So how did this small group seize and maintain control over the subcontinent for such a long period of time? British colonialism in the subcontinent lasted nearly 2 centuries. First 100 years as a private trading company through the East India Company, and then another 90 years as a sovereign power through direct rule. Part of the story has to do with guns, battles, and military might. But more than any economic, political, or administrative strategy that the British pursued to divide and subjugate the locals, perhaps the greatest weapon in their arsenal was the fidelity of a class of self-interested elite locals who acted as collaborators, not only financing the East India Company's trade, but also giving them power and control over the land and the people that lived there. Number 1. Developing business ties with Indian merchants. The East India Company began trading in the subcontinent in spices, textiles, and luxury goods. The trade and its resulting wealth would entirely not have been possible without the financing and support of local merchants in Bengal, especially the Hindu mercantile class. Jagat Seth, the rich Jain banker, not only allowed the company access to his credit line, but after the Battle of Plassey, in which the British gained control over Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa, he also brokered the deal for when and how much Mir Jafar, the governor of Bengal, would pay in damages to the company. India's local elite found that their commercial interests aligned with those of the white newcomers, and this alignment became crucial to spread of British control in the subcontinent. Number 2. Creating a loyal feudal class. Similarly, the EIC established a close partnership with another class of locals who played a key role in tax collection, the feudals. In 1793, the East India Company created the first large permanent land holdings in the subcontinent. Before, under the Mughal Empire, land was allocated to functionaries of the court, but the allocation was not permanent. Ultimately, the land belonged to the empire and tax collection was overseen and controlled by the Mughal bureaucracy. But now, by allotting large land holdings to selected families and making them permanent property, the British helped create a more powerful and loyal land-owning elite. In turn, the British depended on these new zamindars for tax collection from the farmers who worked the land. Without oversight, zamindars enforced cash crop farming and extortionate taxes to be able to keep up with EIC's tax rates and still make their own profits. Number 3. Collaborating with princely states. As the Mughal Empire declined in the 19th century, there was a mushrooming of princely states in the subcontinent, which were typically ruled by local chiefs and princes. These princely states were beneficial to the Raj in 2 ways. First, they presented an opportunity for the British to cut operational costs when weaker princes were willing to submit to indirect rule for the Raj. For example, it served the British very well that they let Rajasthan, primarily a desert area, remain a princely state. Secondly, these princes were a key collaborator class when it came to quashing rebellion. The British supplied princes in their favor with weapons, armies, and training, and they in turn helped quell any opposition in their lands. An example of this is in the aftermath of the Jallianwala Bagh massacre in April 1919, when the British gunned down 1,500 Muslims, Hindus, and Sikhs. During the riots that erupted afterwards, the British were helped by Punjab chiefs in ensuring protection of telegraph lines and railways in their own realm and surrounding areas, so that anti-colonial attacks could be reported and troops transported to areas with uprisings. Number 4. Creating a class of elite Indian middlemen. In their nearly 200-year rule over the subcontinent, the British passed dozens of acts to facilitate their goal of controlling the Indian populace. One example of this is the start of the Indian Civil Service in 1858, which for the first few decades was staffed by only a small number of white officials. But in 1922, the British Empire allowed Indian candidates to sit for the civil service exam in India. This created an elite administrative ruling class of Indians, who became the bridge by which the Englishmen governed the masses. But entry into this elite class was determined by a demonstration of how assimilated the native was. As the official, Thomas Macaulay, stated in 1834, "We must do our best to form a class who may be interpreters between us and the millions we govern, a class of persons who were Indian in blood and color, but English in tastes, opinions, morals, and intellect." The success of British colonial projects can be credited to their insidious economic, political, and administrative strategies, but credit also goes to the opportunism of local merchants, zamindars, officials, and rulers who tried to gain power through the British by helping them exploit their fellow Indians. An example of this is in the many Indian businessmen who did not support the Quit India movement. Such moneyed men, wrote Gandhi, supported British rule because their interests were bound up with its stability. It's important to realize that neither the power nor the interests of this collaborator class underwent any sort of significant shift with the departure of the British. The business families, zamindars, and institutions that gained power under colonial rule persist to this day. Their commercial, landholding, and bureaucratic interests have a significant impact on the political and economic state of Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh. The purpose of highlighting these structures of colonial exploitations and the key players involved is not to mourn the past. The more important takeaways are 1. Being able to identify remnants of exploitative colonial practices, and 2. To be able to identify how exploitation at the hands of multinational corporations and states manifests today. Similarities with the structures of imperialism can be easily found. Claims of progress and development, exploitation of our land by powerful countries, a local elite business class directly benefiting from the exploitation of the many.